Wendy Whitman, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much for having me on, Patrick.
All right, I have to ask, OJ, Robert Blake, guilty or innocent?
Well, I say guilty, guilty. That covers both of them.
I think most cops would feel the same, and most people, common sense wise, when you look at the preponderance of evidence, which is what they should be doing. But I mean, what a zoo. I couldn't even imagine trying to keep that courtroom somewhat, under order with, especially OJ, I think, because I think he was a little bit of a bigger celebrity than Robert Blake. I mean, I grew up watching Beretta, we were talking about that off air. There was definitely interest in it, but OJ, holy cow. I mean, you just can't picture him killing anybody.
Yeah, I think what happened is OJ was really the first major, Court TV started in around 91 and I started there in 95. OJ was really the first big celebrity case I think that we covered or that blew up in the news. And once Court TV, started and we started covering trials live on air and stuff like that, people paid more attention to cases. It's not there was never a celebrity who killed anybody, but it was the first time it was really in everyone's face and aired and all that. And I think we were even shocked, not shocked, but somewhat surprised how big OJ became. And it was a year trial. It just went on and on and on. Our paperwork became like a phone, New York City phone book at a certain point. We had so many documents and witnesses and to keep track of. So I think obviously because of Court TV, again, if there had not been Court TV, we always wonder how much Court TV has contributed to the true crime craze in general. But I think certainly televising a case like that, it would have been in the news either way, but people really got to watch everything and it had a lot of incredibly interesting witnesses. So people just got hooked and it did last for a year. So it was like a soap opera. And they even broke in, they were canceling regular soap opera schedules and airing it even on ABC and networks like that, all during the day.
Wow, I can't believe it was a year.
Yeah, and they were sequestered. The jury was sequestered for a year.
Oh,
Yeah,
talk about drawing the short end of the straw.
I
It's
know.
like, holy cow, you're gonna be living in a hotel for a year?
Well, we've always said there are people you can tell when you watch jury selection, the people that are lying to get out of jury selection, and there are people that are lying to get onto a jury in certain cases, like Casey Anthony and OJ. So we could spot who wanted what. It was obvious, the buzzwords they used and stuff.
I
It was
can't
fun.
even imagine, you know, a whole year. I remember being involved in trials that were like 3 or 4 days long, and I'm like, God,
Yeah,
this is never ending.
yeah,
A
yeah.
whole year. I don't think I could handle it. I would lose my stuff. That would not be fun.
Yeah, and sometimes jurors really bond with each other, and I don't remember if they lost jurors along the way or not. I can't remember that far back, but yeah, it was a tough road there.
So I imagine the defense wanted to drag it on that long, or what do you
I
think?
think the case itself just became its own animal kind of thing. I think it just went on and on and on. I don't really think either side was trying to drag it out. I think just because of the sensational aspect of it and all the witnesses they started to call, it just got out of hand. And Judge Ito was criticized a lot for the way he handled it. A judge is supposed to sort of be like the director of a film or something. They're
Right.
supposed to be reining people in, making the right motion decisions and rulings and things like that. And I'm not going to beat up on Judge Ito, but I think he sort of lost control of the trial at a certain point, and it probably overwhelmed him. I don't think he was expecting. It's tough for a judge to be at a case like that, and I think there were so many big personality players involved and lawyers, and I think he just got overwhelmed.
Man, I can't even imagine what that legal bill would be.
It would be high. It would
Oh
be high.
Lord. I mean, it's like,
It would be high.
about 11, 12 years ago, I went through a divorce and I was just like, oh my God,
Yeah.
this these lawyers are making so much money. I
So much
can't
money.
even fathom
Yeah.
what a year would
Yeah.
look like at
Yeah.
trial, because it's not only just trial, you have to pay them for trial prep.
Oh,
You
sure.
have all kinds of meetings going on. You have, I mean, it isn't
Yeah.
just, sitting down and going through the trial. So, man, that meter would just be
It would
burning
it
up.
would be high.
Yeah.
It would be high.
And I think the OJ thing too, we were talking before, one of my best friends, his mom, and she was not alone in this, was glued to the TV for a year.
Yeah.
And I think this was the first like trial. I think it was unique in where you had such a big celebrity, and it was just so sensational and so like, I can't believe this. And it just had that sticky effect where it just drew people in.
Oh, absolutely. And as I think I mentioned, regular networks were preempting their normal soap operas. So this became the soap opera, which is really literally what it became.
So what was your job at Court TV when this was going on?
With OJ, I believe I was I started as an intern, then I was a PA, an associate producer, and moved on up. And finally, my last job title there was vice president in charge of the live trial coverage. So at the time of OJ, I was doing, regular production work, not overseeing things.
Mm.
And I'll never forget the moment we all gathered around in the newsroom when they were going to announce the verdict, and it was so fast, we knew he was going to get off. It was just obvious, because if they were in any way going to convict him, they would not have done it that quickly. It was like, boom, like so fast, and then they announced it the next day. But it was the most eerie. You could hear a pin drop in that newsroom because we had covered it. I was there for 6 months of the trial because I started in the middle of it, but there were people
Okay.
there that had been there for the entire year. And it was just, as much as it was all consuming for viewers, it was really all consuming for us because we were like viewers and producers of it. And it was so anticlimactic to have when he was acquitted. We were like, what was the point of all that?
So what was your job and like how many hours were you putting in a day for that?
I always worked long hours at Court TV because as I rose up to VP, because then I oversaw everything. If we did a West Coast trial, I could be there till 2 in the morning easily. Sometimes they
Mm.
deliberated really late. When we did the OJ Vegas case, we were there till 4 in the morning, and then we stayed through till 10 in the morning, then went home because the verdict came in at like 1 in the morning Vegas time or something, and it was like
Oh,
4 in the morning our time. And we ate all night, ordering food to stay awake. So it was, generally long hours, but I loved it, so I didn't mind.
right. I was telling you a story before how one of my best friends' mom was just enamored with the whole OJ trial. I mean, she didn't miss a second of it. And
Yeah.
some people, they just became consumed with it. It's like in today's world, I think we have shorter attention spans. And everyone's looking at their screen of whatever, they're going through Facebook or Instagram or whatever their, choices for social media or whatever entertainment. But I think this is like the only time that people were so glued to an event on TV for so long, just the length. And she did not give up at all. And she heard that we are going out to California. This is like a year after the trial. And she's like, okay, you have to take pictures of OJ's house for me. You have to take pictures of the crime scene. We're like, yeah, sure. Now, my buddy is 6'7", 6'8". And we pull up to OJ's house and there's all these signs out in front. It's like armed guards will shoot. I mean, it was crazy. So he runs up. I'm like, I don't know, dude, if this is a good idea. So he runs again. He's like 6'8". So
Yeah.
he's on his tippy toes over the fence and he's taking just blind pictures. He doesn't see what he's doing. And of course, I'm me being the smart ass that I'm like, Kato, are you out there, Kato? And I'm thinking to myself, the neighbors just must love this,
Yeah.
So we did that, and then we timed it going to the crime scene from
Yeah.
his house, and it didn't take long at all to
No, it was
go
quick.
from
It's quick
yeah,
distance.
from point A to point B, and that was
Yeah.
still cordoned off. There was still these huge pieces of
Yeah.
wood where
Yeah.
you couldn't even see the crime scene. This is like
Yeah.
a year after.
Yeah. No, it really disrupted that neighborhood, that area in LA, for quite some time.
Yeah, would not be the neighbor. I wouldn't want to be their neighbors, that's for sure. But
No.
let's go back in time a little bit. How does a person go from working with Lily Tomlin, George Carlin, and Tom Laughlin, also known as Billy Jack, who's from Milwaukee,
Yeah.
to working at Court TV and Nancy Grace, being an author? I mean, how did you get into the whole Hollywood thing? How did that start?
Well, when I first got out of college, I had a mutual friend. Lily and I had a mutual friend, and she was starting her show that she took to Broadway. And this woman said, "Oh, Lily needs help," and I said, "Oh, well, I can help her." So I helped her. And then she needed help in New York, and I'm from New York, so I ended up coming down to New York and helping her there for a while, and then with her for a while. And then when somewhat years later, when I moved out to LA to live, I started working for George. But I'd always had in the back of my mind to go to law school. And then it was sort of like now or never. And it seemed like a good idea at the time. It was an agonizing decision to stop working for George and come back east to law school, but I did it ultimately. And then when I graduated, it was the middle of the OJ trial, the first one. And I had
Oh,
never
okay.
planned to go into journalism, but it seemed like it made sense. I thought, oh, well, that does make sense. So I applied there and got hired. And 15 years later, here I am. And then another year, 4 years at Nancy Show
But
of
what did you
HLN.
do with these celebrities? What was your job?
Well, Lily, I was very young at the time. I was just sort of like her personal assistant, and whatever
Okay.
she needed at night on the show, or I'd meet her early and we'd go through all her mail and, just that kind of mishmash of stuff. I was straight out of college. For George, this guy who had worked for him for a very long time, and I basically were running his office with his manager, and I
Okay.
got very close to his wife, and, it was just like a little family. So we just sort of managed all his stuff, his appearances and all of that.
What are some of your fondest memories of working with these celebrities?
I think George is just like, like used to hang out with Brenda, was his wife, in their, in their home, in their bedroom, and George would come in and out and make little funny comments and things. And I think just the personal with George, it was more the personal interaction that I had with him and his family. Lily, it was just fascinating. We would go out after the show. She'd be all like sort of revved up after the show at night, and
Sure.
we would, often just go out afterwards to a club or something. And she would, and then, she never turned it off. She would grab napkins and make notes of different routine ideas. And it was just really fascinating to watch that she could never shut her mind down. She was all, everything gave her an idea for another routine. So it was very interesting to watch how both of them worked.
I think that's such a neat opportunity for a young
Yeah.
person coming
Yeah.
out of college. And, I'm sure it opened your eyes to how the, quote unquote real world works.
Oh, sure. And I think a lot of people misunderstand. I think that I wrote for them. I did not write for them. I worked for them. So it wasn't that there were specific skills that translated to Court TV. Court TV, I did everything, production stuff, and then executive stuff, and picking trials and all of that.
Right.
But I always tell people we use black humor at Court TV, so the
Yeah.
comedy thing continued.
Yeah, and my hat's off to comedians, good comedians in general, because I think most of them are geniuses.
Yeah,
It's a very, very tough thing to
yeah,
do day after day, week after week,
it
trying to
is. And there
make
were
people
times I
laugh.
would, sorry to interrupt. There were
No.
times I would go, see George where I'd sit in the audience and watch him. It was just interesting to do that and see the audience's reaction. And sometimes he would just blow me away. He did this one routine once on all the crazy tech stuff. And he crammed in literally in a minute routine, he crammed in so much stuff. It was so brilliantly done the way he did it. And it's sort of like Robin Williams can just
Oh,
fire away like an automatic, like so quickly. And I think like Robin Williams, George, Lily, those are really three comedic geniuses. I think the word genius is thrown around too much, but they really are. The three, I would say the three of them, because George just reminds me a little bit of Robin Williams in terms of that one routine,
mm.
because everyone always comments on Robin Williams how he would just say things so quickly, and if you actually dissected what he said, it was very smart and a very unique take on whatever he was talking about.
Yeah, complete disclosure. Wendy and I have chatted before on another podcast that I'm a co-host of. And I asked you that question. And one thing that stuck out in my head was, I think it was George Carlin's, that you have to ask.
Right. He used to say his advice his mother always gave him was, if you want something, you got to ask for it. And you won't always get it, but at least you know you tried.
Yeah. And, there's a lot of authors that listen to this podcast.
Yeah,
And if you don't ask, it ain't going to happen.
exactly.
It's not going to fall out of the sky.
No.
Just not at all, unfortunately. And
Yeah.
if it does, good on you. Congratulations, because it doesn't happen that often.
Yeah.
So you decided to go to law school. What kind of law, when you started law school, what kind of law did you think you were going to be practicing?
I think in the back of my mind, I never thought I would practice. I just thought it'd be a good credential. The only thing I thought of at all, I thought, well, maybe I could do entertainment law. But I think deep inside me, I knew I wasn't going to practice. I thought it would just be sort of like a nice you know, a lot of people go to law school is not like medical school where you go to medical school, you're gonna become a doctor. I think law school, you can use a law degree in so many different ways. And pretty
Right.
much when Court TV first launched, from the person who ordered the supplies to the person at the top, everyone had a law degree, and
Oh,
none of
okay.
us ended up really using it. However, what I did learn in law school, I think it would have been much harder to work at Court TV and not have that background. I think subliminally, I realize in retrospect, it really did help me navigate a lot of stuff there. And sometimes at the time I thought, oh, it didn't really matter if I went to law school, but it did. I think we were much more informed. And, you know, when other networks, like when Michael Jackson's case blew up and other networks were covering it, we would always look at their fonts, and they so often just got everything wrong because none of them had law backgrounds, and they
Oh,
would misname the penalty phase, this, and they just, and we would laugh because they had no expertise in anything. And everyone at Court TV basically had a law degree, so we didn't make those kind of mistakes.
oh, okay. Yeah, I never thought of it like that. That
Yeah,
makes perfect sense to me. Now,
yeah,
when you were going through law school, obviously you study all the different aspects of law, et cetera.
right.
Did you ever, obviously, when you're going through the criminal law stuff, did you ever think to yourself, yeah, it might be kind of cool to be a prosecutor or maybe even a police officer?
Oh yeah, I think you know, even when I was younger, I used to think I'd make a great prosecutor because I would be relentless and would pound away till I got the right answer or got them, you know, convicted or this or that. I think if I had ever decided to practice law, I probably would have wanted to do that. But ultimately, I took another path.
I understand that. Now, going back to Court TV, you know, there's a whole lot of negative. I mean, most of the time you're not going to watch Court TV for, the happy trial of, or something that's, well, first of all, it has to be serious, because then people aren't going to watch it if it's not serious.
Right.
And, it's a lot of negativity. It's a lot of doom and gloom. It's a lot of just horrific stuff that happens to people. You know, I would imagine that would wear you down after an amount of time.
Oh, sure. There were two specific cases, Shannon Christian and Christopher Newsom's murders in Knoxville and the Carr brothers murders in Wichita, Kansas, that of all the cases we covered over the years, you know, that sometimes I would think that could be a tricky question. If someone said of all the cases you covered for basically 20 years, which one stood out? And you might have a hard time figuring that out because there were so many and they were all so gruesome and awful. But those two really resonated with me, and they were just such horrific cases, and they did not get the attention the media I always felt they deserved. In my first book, Premonition, I put a lot of references to true cases in that book just to give the, even though it was fiction, to give it a touch of realism. And those two cases I did highlight quite a bit. And those were the two that really did haunt me. And you know, I feel like people need to be aware of their surroundings, and it's not that that kind of thing happens every day, but it shouldn't happen at all, especially in this country.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree. You know, as a police officer, and a sergeant later, it's people don't call you for the best day of their life. Hey,
Right.
everything's going and running smooth, and hey, just want to call and say hi, whatever. Usually they're having the worst day of their life. And
Right.
then, you're seeing the aftermath, and it's being replayed and regurgitated in detail.
Yeah.
That, how did that affect you personally, like with your personal life? Did you become like hyper vigilant? Did you get a CCW? I mean, some pepper spray, or I mean, what did that look like for you personally?
Well, I find that most, well, I don't know if I should use the word most, but an awful lot of people at Court TV, particularly the reporters and field producers who went to the trials, did become very paranoid because you realize anyone can be a murderer, and it can ultimately, these crimes can pretty much happen to anyone. A lot of them are very random. I think most, I'm not sure the stats on intimate murders, which are considered murders between people who know each other versus stranger murders. But there are an awful lot of situations where these people did absolutely nothing wrong and they just were in the wrong place at the wrong time. And in retrospect, maybe they could have saved themselves, maybe they couldn't. There's certainly many, many, many hopeless cases where there was literally nothing they could do. They were
Right.
just going to get murdered once they were in that situation. So I think, of course, because then, as I always say this, an average person doesn't think about murder and crime 24/7, but we did because we spend all day long at work dealing with it, and then we would leave and we'd be all nervous. You know, it was hard to shut it off. And those, like as I said, those two cases particularly, I had nightmares for months over those cases. If I heard this tiniest little creak when I was going to sleep at night, I couldn't go to sleep. Like it was very hard to turn off some of the things that happened. And but ultimately and part of what I also put in my book, again, even though it's fiction, because the protagonist is loosely based on myself, so she was working in TV and covering crime and all that, is that the effect that covering these cases does have on the producers.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, absolutely. It's the same thing with cops. One coping mechanism is gallows humor or dark
Yeah,
humor or black humor, whatever you
yeah.
want to call it. Yeah, I would imagine it's the same with you guys.
Oh yeah, absolutely. We used to, at the beginning of every trial, we used to say, if you made it this far, you're guilty. And that was, we always also used to say that marriage kept us in business because we covered so many spousal murders. So those were two of our little jokes.
Yeah. And it's like, and the more horrific the situation, the darker things got when it came to
Yeah,
the humor.
yeah,
It's a coping mechanism. It
yeah, it
doesn't mean
is.
you're a bad person. It doesn't mean you're a
No,
monster or anything like that. It means you're a human being, and that's how you cope with it.
yeah,
And one more thing, that in people that were in your position, and in, there's a lot of similarities between what you did and, the street cops that,
yeah,
saw all this stuff, day in and day out. I saw a statistic not too long ago that the average cop on the street, now this is just an average, sees about 700 to 900 critical incidents, like something horrific in the span of their career, where a normal civilian sees 2 or 3.
right.
I don't know what the statistic would be for you guys, but I'm sure it would be pretty high. I don't know what it is, but that just kind of gives it some context.
Yeah,
And again, we talked about gallows humor, but one thing that I always found interesting was people's faith. You know, I,
yes,
I'm not a highly religious person. I'm, a fallen Catholic. I'm a good Irish boy. And
yeah.
probably Catholic with a little C. That kind of thing. But for you personally, and you don't have to answer this, did this like kind of reaffirm any type of faith that you had, or did it kind of pull you away from it, or what did that look like?
Well, I think Shannon Christian's father, Gary, who I was when I was on Nancy's show, we did a show on the only female defendant in the case, because she was getting a retrial. They all were, because the verdicts were tossed because of things the judge had done. And he had said that he used to be religious, but after his daughter was murdered, it was hard to have faith in God. And I think I I'm not a religious person to begin with, really, and I sort of feel that this is our one shot at life, and that I don't claim to know what happens when you die, but my feeling is that you just, there's an expression, don't exist, exist, don't exist. That's what everyone, the cycle is. You're not here, then you're born and you are here, and then you're not here again. So I can't say it shook my belief in God, because I've never really been a religious person. But I can see where someone who was religious, if you went through such an awful experience like that, it would be hard to believe that there was some fair, just being that would allow this kind of stuff to happen.
Yeah, what I have seen is two polar opposites. It's like when horrific things happen and you're hit over the head with them on a daily basis, sometimes you kind of go running towards a faith or a higher power for
Yeah,
solace.
right. For
you know
solace, yes.
yeah, and then the opposite happens, like how could there be a higher power or a god, if especially stuff with like old people, little
Right.
kids,
Yeah.
etc. You're just like, I can't wrap my head around it. But then the next day you go to the car accident and the car is completely mangled and that guy should be dead, and he walks away with a little bruise, and you're like, uh or I responded to a shooting. This guy was shot, I think 8 or 9 times, and he walked out of the ER like 3 or 4 hours later.
Yeah.
And you're like, how could, and then you go to the shooting where a little kid is on their grandpa's lap reading a book, and a stray bullet comes in and
Right.
they're shot dead. So yeah, yeah, I don't know. That's
I think a
I
lot of life is just very random, you
Yeah,
know?
it is. I mean, we have some control over it. I mean, obviously
Yeah.
I'm not jumping out in front of any buses or
Yeah.
going to an ATM in a sketchy neighborhood at 2 o'clock in
Right.
the morning.
Right.
and taking lots of money out and kind of advertising the fact,
Right.
that kind of thing, just
Yeah.
yeah. So how difficult was it going from being a court reporter, all of that stuff, to writing fiction? You were deeply immersed in real life. All your stuff that you dealt with was the real deal,
Right.
obviously. And now you're thinking, I'm going to write fiction. What'd that look like?
I think it was a relatively easy transition for me because even though I wrote fiction, I brought in some. I think as you start to write, you realize how authors, they always say, write what you know. So even if you're making it fiction, you're drawing upon truth and you're drawing upon all your experiences. At least for me, that was the experience with my first book. So I would say I always felt I had a book in me after covering crime for 20 years, and I just had to sort of sort it out and figure out what direction to go in. And ultimately, I made it a fiction book, but I drew from reality. So I think it worked well, and I think the book has a very strong touch of realism to it because I do reference a lot of true cases in it, and because of my experience, decades of experience working in crime and covering crime. So I feel like I did bring a lot to the book that maybe just an average thriller might not, might lack or not have.
I think it would almost be impossible for you not to inject some of your experience. I mean, again,
Yeah,
almost 2 decades of, true crime, getting hit over the head with it on a
yeah,
regular basis.
yeah.
How do you just wipe that out of your memory? You can't,
No, you
and
can't.
a lot of fiction is based on reality.
Yeah,
And, the
absolutely.
books that I write, same thing. I'm
Yeah.
writing, I thought it would be weird to write fiction. And then I start going, and I'm like, no, it really isn't. I
And
mean,
I've met other authors who've written books, and a lot of them, the core kernel that started the book is something real, but then they morphed it into fiction. So I think it's more common, it's more common than you think. I think the difference with me is that I actually worked covering crime for 20 years, and I think a lot of authors have not. It doesn't mean their books aren't good. There's some of them are just amazing writers, but I feel like those 20 years I was able to sort of bring the important parts of it into my book, which just was satisfying for me.
I when you talk to authors about getting ideas and all that, the good authors that, craft their stories very well, usually they're the ones who ask what if.
Right.
It's like, okay, you might be going through like an ordinary circumstance one day and you think to yourself, well, what if this happened? Or what if that happened? And then before you know it, you have a good story. Or you
Yeah.
could go through your experiences. Well, what if X happened instead of Z?
Right.
And now all of a sudden, boy, you got a good story going.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's all how you look at it, I guess. So let's talk about your books.
Yeah.
Why do this crazy thing we call writing books? Why beat
um,
your head against the computer every day and do this?
I know. Well, I think the first book was definitely like therapy for me, and it was sort of like the culmination of my 20-year journalism career covering crime. And I knew what I wanted to include and what I wanted to get across. And from some friends who've read it and given me feedback, which I know was honest feedback, they did understand because they know me, they understood what I was trying to do with the book. So I think that was very satisfying. And when I ended the first book, I knew I had to write a second book. I had to write a sequel to flesh out the story. So and now I've had other ideas for. I did start the third book. I could make it into a trilogy, but I've also have a bunch of ideas for nonfiction books. So I have to sort of right now I'm promoting the second book, Retribution, and once I'm sort of that's sort of behind me to some extent, I think I have to make a decision whether I'm going to write the third book or whether I'm going to do the nonfiction book that I have an idea for.
Yeah, your debut novel was Premonition, and
Correct.
it's book one of the Deer Killer series. It's more or less about serial killers. Now,
Right.
I'm gonna back up a little bit of as far as your writing goes. Didn't you like wake up in the middle of the night and you're like, I gotta start writing?
Yeah, I initially thought I would do a nonfiction book, but I had different ideas, and I knew it was going to require a tremendous amount of research, so I didn't want to just dive in and waste, say, 6 months researching something I might not stick with. So I wanted to really make a decision on that. But then I did literally wake up in the middle of the night one night, and I realized I can write as fiction, and of course, fiction is way less research, and you can write a book much quicker. I did have to make sure all the any parts or information about specific true cases I wove into the book, I did double check that my memory was correct and that I was portraying those accurately, but that was very little research because I sort of knew it already and I just was checking, and it wasn't a whole case with years of court proceedings and that kind of thing. So I think writing fiction worked well for me, and I think it was probably good for the first book, because if I had done my nonfiction book idea first, I would have spent a very long time just doing the research, which would have delayed the actual writing. And I had to sort of know if I was capable of writing a book. And I think fiction allowed me to do that much quicker.
Sure. Now, I love the story of you waking up in the middle of the night and just like start writing. What was it, like
Yeah.
midnight or 1 o'clock in the morning? You just
Yeah, it was so weird. And then I wrote till like 5 in the morning, and then I took a break, and then I just kept writing. And I made myself write a certain amount of pages a day until the first draft was done.
that's
And then, of
awesome.
course, there was a lot of editing, like there
Oh,
always
sure, sure. But I have the Cops and Writers Facebook group. There's a lot of authors in
Right.
there. One of my authors that's in there is a very prolific, successful author. His name is Nick Russell, and I interviewed him on the podcast a while back. And it started out with he had a dream,
Right.
and he wrote his dream down when he woke up. He had a pen and paper by his bedstand, and this continued for almost a week, and the story just kept on going.
Yeah.
And I'm like, that's amazing. And he just kept on going and kept on going, and then he finished and he's like, this is crap. So his wife found it and she's like, no, this is really good. And he published it, like I think like 5 years later.
Interesting.
He self-published,
Yeah.
and he killed it. That
Yeah.
just it made the New York Times bestseller list.
Wow.
It is, and it went from the garbage can. But I mean, like, look at Stephen King. Carrie was in the garbage.
Yeah.
Yeah, and his wife, fished it out and was like, no, this is good. It's like,
Yeah.
but it's amazing what could happen in the middle of the night when you least expect it, huh?
Yep. It's true.
So as far as your book series, the Deer Killer series here, why do you think there's such an attraction to this genre? Serial killers, obviously true crime, but like a serial killer series. Why do you think people are so attracted to that?
To serial killers specifically?
Yeah.
I think that I think part of it is the fact that they can, because a lot of them kill for decades on and off. They go dark and then they kill again and this and that. I think part of that is simply that they are getting away with it. And you would think it'd be really hard to get away with murder. And a lot of them, like BTK, Dennis Rader, did all his murders in a very narrow radius of where he lived. It wasn't that he was, some of them go all over the country, some of them do all kinds of crazy stuff. He was doing it. He had a job, a family. He was doing it sort of in his neighborhood to some degree, and he still got away with it for a very long time. So I think the getting away with it factor is an enormous one. And also, I think I always say this when I'm asked this question, that this kind of sadistic killing, especially of people you don't know at all, who've never crossed your path or done anything to you, people find it really, a normal person finds it impossible to understand how anyone could do that to another person. So it's sort of like just an endless mystery of human nature. And there aren't that many mysteries, So I think it's the combination with serial killers of the fact that they are able to outsmart the police or just get away with it for such a long period of time, an awful lot of them. And that's why they're serial killers. They keep killing. And
Right.
And also just the fascination that with the human mind, that some people can be born that depraved, because I believe they're born that way, that they're just so depraved. It's just
Well,
hard to relate to that.
let me ask you this, and I ask people who have had a lot of exposure to the dark side of life, do you believe in just pure evil? Some people are born and just are pure evil.
Oh, absolutely. And it isn't just that they are crazy. Like, I used to think anyone who, before I worked at Court TV, I thought, well, anyone who kills someone is just crazy, but they're not. They know exactly what they're doing. There is a word, sadistic and sadism. They get off on hurting people. And there have been cases where a victim got away from the killer, through different means. And a lot of them have reported that while they were trying to kill them, they became like manic. They totally get off on it. So yes, we've seen such horrific murders, throughout the years of Court TV. There are definitely people that literally are pure evil, that they enjoy inflicting pain on other people. It makes them feel powerful. They get off on it. and it's really just despicable.
Yes. Now, book 2, Retribution, comes out July 25th. Tell us about this book.
Well, this book picks up where Premonition left off and continues the story. It is told from the killer's point of view, which I think is really interesting. People like that, and
Yeah, I like that. I read
as
it
I
and I really
yeah.
enjoyed that.
Yeah, and I've also answered this in other interviews that they say, "Oh, was it hard to get into the killer's mind?" And I say, sadly, it wasn't, because I've seen so many so many killers and cases. You do start to understand how they think, and a lot of them, it's like an ego thing where they're smarter than everybody else, and they can get away with things, and they can trick this and trick that, and they're just, again, enjoy inflicting pain on people and all of that. So it was not hard for me to get into the killer's mindset, but I think that that is my background in crime, plus telling it from the killer, mainly from the killer's point of view, I think makes the book very interesting.
You know, I don't want to give away anything, but what I did like is the breadcrumbs that the killer
Yeah,
left for the people that were doing the investigating.
yeah, and that's
And
very common. Like BTK, Dennis Rader in Wichita, ultimately got caught because he was taunting the police, and it's just like the criminals or murderers who say something stupid to their cellmate, and when they're waiting trial, and then all these kind of things. Again, a lot of it's an ego thing. Aside from their evilness, that they can't help but blab because they're so proud of what they did.
right. So when you're writing a book, obviously you know the beginning. Do you know the ending when you first start writing the book, or does it take you to the ending?
I think fairly early on when I was writing Premonition, I knew how I had to end it, or if not immediately. That book was, I had a very definite thing in my head of how I wanted to do that book. The second book, I had to I felt I could have taken the plot in a lot more directions. So I think the first book laid the groundwork for the second book, and I think once I figured out what the basic plot line would be, um, I also at a certain point understood how I wanted to end it.
Now, as far as writing in a series, was this a conscious decision when you first started writing this series? It's like, okay, this has got to be a series. I mean, in a marketing point of view, it makes a ton of sense.
Yeah. No, I think when I wrote the first book, I considered that it might just be one book,
Oh,
but I
okay.
think, but I think once I finished it and I saw the ending, I knew I had to write a second book.
Okay. Now, you're a traditionally published author, correct?
Yes.
How did that work? How did you get an agent, or how did the stars align for all that? How did you get this book deal?
It actually happened pretty quickly, and I had lunch with a friend of mine who's written two bestsellers, and but she's pretty well known. She's been on air for years in New York and nationally. And she said to me, "Trust me, if it happens, it's going to happen fast." I said, "No, but you're really well known. I mean, I've been on air on Nancy's show, but I'm not known to the public as much as you are." She's had her own shows and things like that. She goes, "Trust me, it'll happen fast if it happens." And once I completed the manuscript and felt it was in good enough shape to shop around, um, a friend of mine who I used to work with at Court TV had worked at a publishing house,
Mm,
and she gave me a few contacts. And one woman I spoke to told me that there are publishers who will take you with or without an agent. So I was simultaneously looking for an agent and a publisher at the same time,
okay.
and the publisher was interested right away and didn't care if I had an agent or not. So
Oh,
I
wow.
ended
Okay.
up, certainly wasn't going to turn it down. So I got the publisher before I got the agent. So that's how it worked.
That's interesting. Usually it's the
Yeah,
other way around.
I know. Usually it is.
Have you considered self-publishing at all? Being an indie?
Right now, I don't have to. I did while I was also looking for an agent and publisher. I was also investigating self-publishing at the
Hmm.
time, but I was fortunate enough to get a publisher, so I put that on the back burner. But so at this point, I don't have the need for self-publishing. But who knows the future? You never know.
Right. Yeah, and the lines between the two are becoming very blurred.
They
Y-
are. They are.
It's, 5, 10 years ago, self-publishing was kind of looked down upon.
Yeah.
And now you have big name authors self-publishing books because
Yeah.
they see that the royalties are a
Yeah.
lot higher,
Yeah.
and they're like the hybrid model that
Yeah.
seems to be very prevalent now, where you have an agent, you have a publisher, but
Yeah.
there might be a book that maybe they're not 100% on board with, but you still want to do it. Just do it
Right.
yourself.
Yeah.
So that's not unusual, that's for sure.
Oh no,
Now,
they said there are like millions of self-published books now.
oh
That's
God, yes.
an astronomical number of them.
Yes. Now, as far as the marketing goes, that's one thing most writers are not very happy with or feel uncomfortable with. It's like, okay, I wrote this book and, I put all my blood, sweat, and tears into it and, finally crafted it to where I wanted it to be. Now the real work begins. Now I have to market the dang thing. What's your point of view as far as marketing your books? Like, what are you doing or what do you see working good for you?
I think, with the first book, I used all my contacts and I was on Court TV twice and I did an interview with Jack Ford and Rita Cosby and a lot of people. And I did book festivals and, different events in New York and book parties and all that. So all my contacts were great. They all came through. And I also did hire a publicist. But I think ultimately, and social media is again a huge part of it. And it's a lot of work. You have to really grind it out every day or it isn't really effective. So I think ultimately I love doing interviews. I love doing panels and answering audiences' questions. And a lot of times they're very engaged and all that. But still, ultimately, because I'm in the thick of it right now, the marketing, as much as I love doing the interviews and love interacting with audiences and all of that, it's still a heavy burden to bear, this constant marketing thing, because it's sort of like a never ending um, ordeal, if that's the right word, to go through, and you're never sure what's going to trigger book sales and what's not going to trigger book sales. So, it's just, and I'm not a marketer. Like I have some author friends who have a marketing background, who know more or a little more savvy about what to do and what works and what doesn't work. It's a difficult thing, I think, for most authors. And a friend of mine said a lot of authors she knows are introverts, and you have to
Right.
put yourself out there all the time. And if you have no experience in marketing, ultimately, unless you're like a Stephen King, one of these very well-known authors with a top publisher where they promote you and you don't have to do anything but give them your manuscript, ultimately it generally does fall on the author to promote themselves and to hire someone
Absolutely.
to figure it all out. And it's difficult. It's very difficult.
Absolutely. So what does writing do for you personally? Is it soothing? Does it get the adrenaline going, or what does it do for you?
I think there are times when you're writing worlds and you get an idea and it just sort of seems to come out of nowhere, like it's sort of being channeled through you. It's a thrilling feeling when you
Mm.
feel like it's all coming together and you're doing the right thing. Again, when I sat down to write the first book, I didn't know if I was really capable of writing a whole book or not, and now I see I really am. And the second book I love even more than the first book for different reasons. Although the first book did specific things I wanted it to do that were important to me for my career. But I love the actual writing. I think it's really fun when you come up with a good idea and you're working through the characters and all of that. The marketing less so. Um, but I have thoroughly enjoyed it. And I've also met so many interesting people and we connected with so many people and met a lot of authors. There's a huge group of women thriller writers in Connecticut. A lot of them are very successful and they've just been very supportive. It's a wonderful community. So that was like an unintended bonus that I didn't expect. And it's been a very interesting journey, very interesting, and some things I expected, some things I had no idea what to expect.
Now,
But I do love the actual writing.
excellent. Now, when you were writing your book or thinking about it or whatever, do you have a specific actor or actress in your brain as far as who these characters are going to be?
Yeah, I think when I was writing Premonition, I did visualize. I'm sure most writers do this. In your head, you're visualizing the scenes. And I did set in Connecticut where I live, so I knew what I was writing about, which is very important for the authenticity of the book, because readers can sniff that out, whether it's,
Sure.
it's fake or it's not fake. Um, I did have some of the actresses I had in mind for the protagonist are not that well known, so people might not know them. I was thinking potentially of Jeff Bridges for Vito, who was the private
Sure.
eye. But I think besides specific actors, it was more just visualizing the scenes. I
Mm,
visualized how it would look if you were doing it as a TV, like a limited TV series or something. And I think if you can't visualize it, then you're probably not writing correctly.
gotcha. Well, tell you what, I have a Facebook group and there's some questions in there for you. Let's go
Okay.
over there. All right. Francis Sheldrick says, sounds like a fun interview. I think the behind the scenes stories will be very useful for writers. I'd also enjoy hearing about the inconsistencies and quirks of the personalities she's encountered. things that would surprise us, and who is the most frightening criminal she's ever covered and the most deceptive?
Oh, that's interesting. The most frightening were I guess, were the Carr brothers who murdered the people in Wichita, and the group of defendants who murdered Shannon Christian and Christopher Newsom, because that literally was one of the most sadistic, awful cases. I know I keep coming back to those cases, but those were really, really bad murder cases. So I would say absolutely those cases.
Okay. Now, let's see. Carrie Presta says, awesome. Kimberly Love accepted. Wow. She sounds amazing. And the fact that she worked for Lily Tomlin, that is really cool, because everybody loves
That's
Lily
cute.
Tomlin. Come
Yeah,
on,
yeah,
you know.
yeah.
Question. Knowing what she knows now and seeing everything she's seen, if she had a chance to go back and do anything differently, would she? Or would she follow the same path that took her to law school than a television career?
I would say that I definitely feel like I was destined to work at Court TV. I think it was a very, very, very special place to work, and I've always cared about victims' rights. And I think that we always said it was the best kept secret in television, and we were so bonded. We were just like such a close knit group of people that I firmly believe that different turns in my life unexpectedly took me there, and it's definitely where I belonged.
Excellent. So what's next? What's next for Wendy?
Well, as I said, I already did start book 3, but I think once I'm done with the marketing for Retribution, I'll decide whether I'm going to switch to nonfiction or write a third book and make it a trilogy. I could really go either way. I also I've gotten involved in dog meat organizations, particularly trying to rescue dogs. So I've been spending a lot of my free time helping fight the dog meat trade, which has been a very, very wonderful experience for me. And I was out in LA in April greeting a transport of 22 dogs they had rescued, and we spent the day with them, and it was really an amazing experience because I'm a big dog lover. So that's, I think, traveling, working on my books, and helping the dogs are my 3 passions.
Outstanding. Keep on helping those pooches. I think
Yeah,
most dogs are better than most people. So
absolutely. And Yulin starts today, which is really very sad.
Oh,
The
okay.
Yulin Festival starts today.
What's the Yulin Festival?
It's I mean, they say every day is Yulin in China because they kill dogs all the time, but
Ugh.
they've been rounding up dogs for weeks now, if not months, holding them in deplorable conditions, and they're being awaiting a gruesome death. It's a dog meat festival where
Oh,
they slaughter like 10,000 dogs.
oh my Lord. Ugh.
Yeah. And a lot of
That's
people aren't aware of it, and
yeah,
no one wants to listen to it, but you can't stop it if you don't understand it's going on.
right. Absolutely. Oh my gosh.
Sometimes we have to face horrible things
Yes, we do. Yes,
to
we
fix
do.
them.
All right. I think this is a good place for us to end. I tell you what, Wendy, I love talking to you. This has been a lot of fun. Oh, one more thing for you. I think you should
Sure.
start a podcast. If you're going to
I
do a
know I've been
true,
thinking of doing it. I've been
if
thinking of
you have a
doing it.
true crime book, the podcast would be the perfect companion to promote said book. And, they feed off of each other.
Yeah.
And
No,
you
I
have the
totally agree
chops
with
for
you.
it, and you
Yeah.
have the connections most likely. Man,
Yeah.
I think that would just blow up. I think that'd be awesome.
Yeah, I'm giving it serious consideration.
Well, you keep me posted because I'll be more than happy to promote it as much as possible. Okay.
Oh, that's wonderful. I really appreciate that.
All right. Well, all right, everybody. Let's see here. Retribution comes out July 25th. Go out and buy the book. Again, Wendy, it's always a pleasure speaking with you. Thank you so much.
You too, Patrick. Thanks for having me on.